Welcome back to Insight. Our special guest is PJ Patterson, times three in terms of the amount of elections he has done in a row. Still on record as being the only person to do it as leader. But he spoke of the years when the chief, I think he was called at the time, told him that he's running up as a mad ants and it will come to naught, and they pulled out of the election. This country, Jamaica, in 1983 it was?
It was.
It was in 1983. I remember very well that the scenario was set that Mr. Siaga, then the Prime Minister, had reneged on a promise that they would have updated the voters list so that we could have a clean list going into the elections. And the party faithfuls gathered at NW headquarters, and the decision was whether or not the PNP was going to contest the elections or not. You were the chair of that meeting.
I was the chair of that meeting.
I found out in the book, because I was saying, where was PJ at the time? Because I was busy writing stories and getting it back on RJR. But
let me
yes,
just
please. It's
give
in
you
that
the
meeting
background.
now. You were in, I wasn't in there.
In
Yes.
1980, we were clobbered
Oh, yes.
in the elections. I took a year off from being an officer in the People's National Party.
You had lost your seat as well.
I lost my
Euphemia
seat.
Williams?
Euphemia
Ah, there
Williams
you go.
beat
My
me
memory's
by
good.
just over 1,000 votes. The morning after, the people in the constituency said if they had known they could vote for me as their member of parliament without voting for the PNP as government, they would not have hesitated to do so. I took a year off, ceasing to be a vice president. And in 1982, I returned, not being a vice president any longer, but being chairman of the party. And I should mention that the chairman of the party was an office that had been created out of the report of the reappraisal committee that I had chaired in 1968, because up to then, the party leader, N.W. Manley, was also the chairman of the party. The first chair of the party was David Core,
Yes.
when Michael Manley was the president and no longer the chair.
Yes.
So I was returned as chairman. I was actually in the Bahamas doing a case before the Supreme Court when I got the news that as a result of a letter which had been written by Paul Robertson, then the
Yes.
General Secretary of the party, asserting that the Minister of Finance had not acted responsibly in the IMF relationships, the Minister of Finance being the Prime Minister, the opposition was raising a question of confidence. And Mr. Siaga jumped at the opportunity because in the wake of what had happened in Grenada
Yes.
with the murder of Maurice Bishop,
et al.
he thought the time was propitious to have an election and catch the PNP off guard. I came from the Bahamas. In fact, when I arrived over the weekend, Michael was still abroad. He was engaged in a lecture tour, and he came back the Saturday after. When I made inquiries, the pollsters said if the elections were held on the existing list, the JLP would win. If, however, it was held on a new list, having regard to the number of young people who were committed to supporting the People's National Party, then the government would be removed. In the discussions at the headquarters of the National Workers' Union, the party was very divided.
Yes.
And it was not divided on the basis of left and moderates,
Yes.
as was the case in previous
That is correct.
situations.
1979.
There were persons who said we must contest no matter what, and there were others, led by Michael Manley, who said we must draw a line in the sand. There has been a breach of a sacred promise not to hold elections on the existing list. And if we capitulate on this, we don't know what the next move would be. So, after long discussions,
Yes.
with me cheering and with gunshots being fired all over
Yes,
in
I was down there
Fletcher's
tonight,
land,
sir. I was down there. Yes.
we came to the final decision.
It was after midnight, sir.
It was after midnight.
Yes.
We came to the decision by a majority that we would not.
How did you vote, sir?
I voted not to contest.
Okay.
I voted not to contest, first of all, because I was of the view that it was the breach of a sacred commitment, that it constituted a severe threat to our democratic practices. And I also felt on the political level, having regard to the arguments which were advanced, that it would have been easier to unite the party around a no contest situation than would have been the case if the opposite decision were taken.
Yes.
Once that decision was taken, everybody decided we had to rally around, and we had to galvanize the party, and we had to take our message out to the people. From that, we developed the idea of the People's Forum.
Let me ask a question about that. Was there a blueprint? Because I covered the People's Forum, the way it was done is almost so official. It was parliamentary in style. Was there a blueprint that you said, well, are we not going to do this, we're going to do this, or did that come out of the decision?
It came out of the decision.
Okay.
And we got the input of those parliamentarians
Yes.
who were very strongly of the view that we should find a process of
14.
operating
Yes.
within the ambit of the parliamentary system, so that we appointed somebody. It was Carl Rattray, virtually as the speaker. We had persons who were shadow ministers speaking on topics of particular importance, and we were able to move all around the country and draw audiences much bigger than would be the case in Gordon House.
Yes. But your general secretary then was on the electoral body, and he was able to report. So you had a key.
We had two representatives.
Yes.
I must say this. We were going into uncharted waters.
Yes.
We had to devise new mechanisms. The government also saw that we were going into perilous waters, and new approaches had to be found to deal with the absence, in accordance with our constitution, of a leader of the opposition. And it is to his credit that
That's Mr. Siaga.
it is to the credit. It is to his credit that Mr. Siaga amended the laws to ensure that in a situation of no contest, and his ending up with the embarrassment of 60 seats, which it was, and with our refusal to name 8 people
The Senate.
for the Senate,
Yes.
he amended the relevant portions to ensure that the person who was the opposition leader prior to the elections would be deemed to exercise those functions which were vested in the leader of the opposition.
And let me give you a report from the media side. So, to date, I have not seen a stronger Senate than when, in 1983, when some serious people came to the front and held our democracy.
Well, we would differ on the assessment of the performance, but there was a group that included people like Dr. Lloyd Barnett,
Yes.
Errol Miller,
Dr. Errol Miller. Yes. The gentleman
Charles-
from Montego Bay.
Charles Sinclair.
Senior.
Courtney Fletcher.
That's correct.
That's a very strong group.
They were.
Just to name but a few.
It was uncharted waters, and they held the fort. We're going to have to take a break on Insight. When we come back, how did he become Prime Minister? What was the route to that high office? We'll be right back on Insight.